Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The PowerPoint stopped for now. The music has stopped, but I hope she's still around. She's there. She played the cello for you, and her name is Ivana Poparic. Thank you very much for your music. On behalf of Pigs in Need and the John Adams Institute, I warmly welcome you all here at this church and auditorium of the University of Amsterdam, de Universiteit van Amsterdam. Varkens in Nood, Pigs in Need, approached me several months ago about a possible lecture by Tom Regan. Hans Baai, together with Claudia Linssen of Pigs in Need, did not need to talk for long. For me, as director of the John Adams Institute, I immediately saw the importance of the subject where Professor Regan stands for. I'm delighted Professor Regan is here tonight and he will share his views with us. The John Adams Institute is an independent, non-profit organization that is dedicated to bring you the best American writers, thinkers, and public figures to audiences in the Netherlands. We have brought you many speakers as diverse as Justice Scalia to Madeleine Albright, Norman Mailer, Tom Wolfe, and Annie Proulx. Just to give you some names. Next month, we will have the brilliant young writer Jonathan Safran Foer in our program. To find out more about this event, I refer to the information table just at this end. You came all out here for Professor Tom Regan. In a moment, Professor Paul Cliteur will introduce him. Paul Cliteur is professor at Leiden University and a well-known columnist on various issues, known for his liberal views, liberal in the European sense of the word. He's also an ambassador for Pigs in Need. After his introduction, Professor Regan will give his talk using the PowerPoint. I hope everything will turn out right. Without a break, we'll have a public interview that will be moderated by NRC journalist and esteemed board member of the John Adams Institute, Tracy Metz. Tracy will invite you also at a certain moment to join in the discussion, and you can use the microphone in the aisle. Enjoy the evening for now, and may I ask Tracy to come and help me out here. Thank you. Oh, sorry, something completely wrong. It was Paul. It was so complicated, so many people here. So, Paul, sorry.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of my little speech is to give you an introduction to what will follow, and that's a lecture by Professor Tom Regan. Now, the first thing, my task is not so easy. It's very thankful to introduce a writer who is a little obscure, but in the case of Professor Regan, we have to do with a very clear writer, so I will be brief. Tom Regan is the most vocal and sophisticated representative of the animal rights movement. Among his many publications, many of them are dedicated to animal rights and environmental philosophy. His most elaborate treatment of this topic is his book, The Case for Animal Rights, but he has also written some books for a broader audience, and that's the case with Animal Rights and Human Wrongs and his most recent publication, Empty Cages. The animal rights movement could be described as the group of philosophers and other scientists and intellectuals that favor the introduction of rights for other animals than the human animal. And their idea is that the introduction of those rights would greatly benefit animals. At this moment, animals are subjected to inhumane treatment by their fellow animals, mainly the human animal. We all know the examples of this. We deprive animals of their skin, we eat them. Sometimes we cut off their heads and hang them on the wall. We cut off their hands to make ashtrays from, as happens with gorillas. Animals are literally at the mercy of one animal, the human animal. What animal rights activists do, basically, I think, is advocate the rights of other animals as a requirement of justice. It is not as new and spectacular as it sounds. This has been done in the past for many creatures, for black people, for women, for slaves. Why not for the non-human animals? Now, there are many reasons why animal liberation is very difficult, but the main reason, I think, that is the following. The overwhelming majority of men living on the planet do not want to give up their privileged position. So they argue with people like Regan, and they say, oh, only humans are human. Only humans are persons. Humans are self-aware. Humans use language. Humans live in a moral community. Humans have souls. God gave animals to us. And the majority of the people consider these to be convincing arguments against changing the status quo. Now, what animal rights activists do is contesting that these arguments are good arguments to deny animals their rights. Later on, Professor Regan will advocate that many animals are subject of a life. This is a central notion in his work. It means animals are not only objects of our lives, instruments that we can use to further our goals. No, animals have a life of their own and also the rights that protect them in their vital interests. The foundation Pigs in Need takes a great interest, of course, in the theoretical foundation of animal rights because that underpins our practical goals. Some years ago, we launched a declaration of the rights for production animals. And the idea was that if animals have rights, it must be possible to formulate those rights in a formal declaration, as has been done with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations in 1948. And we also thought and still think that in the future there will be a special court dealing with the rights of animals. And if there are rights and courts, so there will also have to be a public prosecution office to prosecute those that violate the rights of animals. Now, perhaps these ideas will strike some of you as ludicrous, others as utopian, but hopefully also people who say, well, that sounds ambitious, but it's not impossible. There have happened more unexpected things in world history, and the growing realization that creatures that are genetically more or less identical to the human animal have the same rights as the human animal is not that strange. That non-human animals have the same rights as human animals is from a certain perspective self-evident, as we see it now as self-evident that all men are created equal and in possession of certain inalienable rights. And yet a lot of work has to be done by many intelligent people, and Tom Regan is one of them. Let me conclude with a personal remark on the specific contribution of Tom Regan to the animal rights movement. His specific contribution has something to do with two influences that shaped his life. The first one is that Regan is a specialist in the work of the philosopher George Edward Moore, a British philosopher in the first half of the 20th century. Regan wrote a book under the title Bloomsbury Prophet G.E. Moore and the Development of His Moral Philosophy. Regan also edited the early essays by Moore. Moore is the founding father of the movement in philosophy that's known under the title analytical philosophy. And analytical philosophers favor analysis, clarity, clear distinctions. And usually they do not engage in grand ethical and political projects, but they are very good in meticulous and somewhat abstruse subjects. Now, what distinguishes the work of Regan is that he borrowed the clarity, I think, and the methodological rigor from the analytical philosophy and applied this to the one great moral issue of his life, his concern with the maltreatment of animals. And for this great theme, the position of animals, he is indebted to another influence, Mahatma Gandhi, the second influence of his philosophical development. I do not know whether many of you are familiar with the writings of Gandhi. Of course, everyone knows something about Gandhi. Probably you have seen the film, but not many people have read Gandhi. Well, I have, and I tell you, it's not a likely candidate for admiration by an analytical philosopher. Gandhi's reasoning is much too vague for that. Yet he had a great moral vision, and his vision appealed to Regan. I'm personally very impressed by this great fusion, you can say, of the head and the heart. In his work, in Regan's work, we really encounter, I think, the best of the two worlds. On the one hand, the visionary power of Gandhi, and the analytical power, on the other hand, of George Edward Moore. It's a great pleasure to have him here, and on behalf of the John Adams Institute and the Foundation Pigs in Need, I would like to give the floor to Professor Regan.
Thank you so very much, Paul, for your more than generous introduction, and to the John Adams Institute and Monique Hoppen in particular, and to Claudia Linsen, Hans Bai, and Dirk Verdonk of Varkens and Nood, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sort of. And to all of you for taking time from your busy life to share some time with me. My wife Nancy and I are just so very grateful. I want to begin by reading the first page and a half from my new book, Empty Cages, from the prologue called The Cat. A few years ago, the home box office network, HBO, aired a program entitled To Love or Kill, Man versus Animals. It told a fascinating, let's see if I get this working for me. Here we go. It told a fascinating and at the same time a disturbing story about how different cultures treat the same animals differently. One especially chilling segment took viewers out to dinner in a small Chinese village. You know how in some American restaurants patrons get to choose from among live lobsters or live fish, and how after they make their selection the animal is killed and the chef cooks a meal of their choice? This happens in America. You can say, I'll have this lobster or I'll have this fish. I don't know if it's common here. And how after they make their selection, the animal is killed and the chef cooks a meal of their choice. At this Chinese restaurant, things are the same except the menu is different. At this restaurant, patrons get to select from among live cats and dogs. The video takes its time. First, we see the hungry patrons expect the cats and dogs jammed cheek by jowl into wooden cages. Next, we see them talk it over. Then we see them make their selection. Finally, we see a man, the cook I assume, using long metal tongs, yank a cat from her cage and hurry into the kitchen. What follows does not make for pleasant reading or hearing, I regret to say. While the cat claws and scratches, the cook hits her abruptly several times with an iron bar. Clawing and screeching more now, she is abruptly submerged in a tub of scalding water for about 10 seconds. Once removed and while still alive, the cook skins her from head to tail in one swift pull. He then throws the traumatized animal into a large stone vat where as the camera zooms in, we watch her gulp slowly, with increasing difficulty, her eyes glazed until her last breath taken. She drowns. The whole episode, from selection to final breath, takes several minutes. When the cook serves the meal, the diners eat heartily, thanking him and praising him for his skill. Watching this video, I have never been more stunned in my life. I was literally speechless, like many Americans and many of you. I already knew that some people in China, Korea, and other countries eat cat and eat dog. The video didn't teach me anything new about dietary customs. What was new for me, what pushed me back in my chair, was seeing how this is done, seeing the process. Watching the awful shock and suffering of the cat was devastating to me. I felt a mix of disbelief and anger welling up in my chest. I wanted to shout, as strange and silly as this might sound. I wanted to shout to the television, "Stop it! What are you doing? Stop it!" But what made matters worse for me, at least for me, as I say, was how the people behaved. For them, everything was just so ordinary, just so ho-hum, just so matter-of-fact. The diner said, "We'll have this cat for our dinner," the way we say, "We'll have this roll with our coffee." And the cook could not have cared less about the cat's ordeal. The poor animal might just as well have been a block of wood as far as he was concerned. I have never seen people behave so nonchalantly, so comfortably, so indifferently in the face of an animal's suffering and death. I don't think many of us could watch this episode and not ask ourselves, as I ask myself, what is this world coming to? I think all of us in this room share a common core of compassion. And I think it's awakened for us in our culture, in our time, in our life, by the cat episode. Each one of us, and I know I'm not the exception, each one of us would oppose what happened to the cat. Each one of us would want to intervene if we could. Each one of us would want to help this cat in her ordeal. Each one of us would, if we could, stop it from happening. And that's what I mean. We share in this culture at this time, this place in our life, this common core of compassion that we extend to cats and to dogs and a few other animals. But we do have that common core of compassion. Animal rights advocates, and I know some of you are here, and I'm honored to be in your presence. Animal rights advocates simply generalize on that common core of compassion that all of us share. We just go beyond feeling that way about the cat. We oppose what is being done to other animals in addition to the cat, in addition to the dogs that are mistreated. We want to oppose what is being done on factory farms here in your country, in hog gestation crates where animals spend 4 years in crates too small for them to turn around in, with no social contact, no sunlight, no fresh air, no companionship, not a decent day in their life. Here, not far from here. Well, animal rights want to not only oppose what's being done to the cat in China, we want to oppose what's being done to hogs not far from here. We want to intervene, and if we could, we would help, and if we could, we would stop it. So we are just like everybody else, except we go a little further. We're not nuts. We're not crazy. We're not lunatics or, we just go a little further than other people. We take that common core and let it grow. How did we get this way? Because we're so obviously out of step with most other people. How did we get this way? And I think that there is no one-size-fits-all answer to this. If we had animal rights advocates here in the room, I'm sure we'd all have different stories to tell, but I think there are three basic stories. So if you're not an animal rights advocate, if you're not an animal rights advocate, you know some, you wonder how they got that way, my guess is that one of these three stories is their story. First, there are the Da Vincians. And I use this concept after Leonardo. And we know Leonardo, of course, because of his great paintings, the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, for example. But what may be less well known about Leonardo is he was one of the great animal liberationists, one of the great animal rights advocates, especially of his time. He gave up eating meat as a young boy once he realized where it came from. And he gave up drinking milk as well, and cheese, and all animal products. He was a vegan, Leonardo. He likened the drinking of milk to stealing. Stealing was theft. Drinking milk was theft because you stole the milk from the mother that was intended for the calf, and he would have none of it. And the story is well told how he would go into the marketplace and spend some money and take birds from cages and release them into the air to their freedom. The first, as I say, a kind of animal liberation mentality. Now, Leonardo, I know many animal rights advocates who are like this. They seem to be born with that compassion that is awakened for all of us in the case of the cat, but they feel it for all animals. All those animals that they grow up with in their nursery, all those animals they grow up with in their early childhood, stuffed animals, animals in their clothes, animals on their shoes, animals on their sheets, animals everywhere, animals in their books, elephants and giraffes, lions, tigers, rabbits, cows, pigs. It's the same today, I'll tell you. We have grandchildren, little grandchildren, 1 and 2 years old. We go and reread the books. It's the same as when we grew up. It's old MacDonald's farm all over again. They go oink oink, they go moo moo. I mean, these are some of the first sounds children make. But Leonardo didn't lose that core of compassion he had as a child, but in fact carried it over into his adulthood, as do some animal rights advocates. And then there are this natural empathy that they have, this something that's not taught. It's not like Leonardo's parents had to take him aside and say, I want to teach you a lesson about compassion, or I want to make a proof for you so that you will be convinced that animals should be treated with respect. It's not something he figured out. It's as though it was in the genes of the Da Vincians. And then there are the Damascus, and I use this after the famous episode of St. Paul on the road to Damascus. You may remember the story in the Bible. Saul was on the road to Damascus to go up, as we say in the United States, to put the bad mouth on Jesus. He was going to Damascus to try to tell people not to listen to Jesus, to heap discredit on Jesus so that he would cease to have his influence on others. And as he walked on the road to Damascus, Jesus made himself present to Saul. And you remember the words, he said, Saul, Saul, why dost thou persecute me? And here is this dramatic rendition of as you can see on the ground in the face of this overwhelming presence. And on the basis of this, Saul, the principal detractor of Jesus, becomes Paul, the principal disciple of Jesus. And I think some animal rights advocates, the Damascus, are like this. They have a transforming, life-altering experience. One minute they are oriented towards animals in one way, and the next minute they're oriented in a quite totally different way. Now, I tell you, people can have this experience. I know people who have gone to a slaughterhouse and walked in and then walked out different people. I know people who have seen videos and done it, but I'll tell you another example of a man in Germany I met. He was 10 years old during the Second World War. The Allies bombed. They were in the basement. The siren sounds, and they come up, and he comes up out of the basement, 10 years old, and he walks out, and he hears this clattering of a horse galloping madly down the streets of Berlin. And the horse is on fire. The horse is on fire from nose to tail. Apparently, gasoline had spilled over the horse and was ignited. And as the horse ran directly at him, just as he got to the young boy, he glanced and went past him, and he looked him in the eye. And at that moment, this young boy said, it was as if the horse said to me, What have I done to deserve this? Why aren't you helping me? Except it was more accusatory. What have I done to deserve this? Why aren't you helping me? And from that moment forward, this young boy has devoted his life to asking other people the same questions that the horse had asked him. What have animals done to deserve how they were treated? What are we doing? What are you doing? To others. What are you doing to help them? So there's a new consciousness. Saul becomes Paul, immediately becomes a vegetarian. It's not based on proof. It's not something that's figured out. It's not something you have to be convinced of. It's something that happens to you rather than something that you do. Then there are the rest of us who are animal rights advocates. And I call the rest of us muddlers. Muddlers are people who just are muddling along, getting on with life. They don't know where they're going. They're just kind of moving along. And there's nothing in the genes. It's not like Leonardo, from an early age I understood animals and I stopped eating them and I wouldn't wear them. And nothing like that. And it's not like there's something dramatic. Saul becomes Paul and nothing like that. Muddlers are just getting through life, walking along, and they are on a journey. Whose destination is unknown. When you're on the journey, you don't know where you're going. You know you're moving. You know that there are questions to ask. There are things to think about. There's so much to learn about animals, who they are, what they are, how complicated and fascinating and mysterious and wonderful they are. There's so much to learn, and how they're being treated. And what goes on behind the doors of the laboratory that are locked and we can't get in and we can't get the records. There's so much to learn and understand and to digest. And then at the same time, there is this experience too, this coming to know animals through the heart. I bet everyone here, maybe if not everyone, I'll bet 90% of you have had a cat or dog in your life and have lost a cat or dog in your life. And I know that that's the death in the family. Our heart is so hurt when we lose an animal with whom we shared our life. So our heart has a place for animals. It's just a question of whether that heart stays narrow and confined and stingy, or whether it opens up and embraces animals that are like unto those friends we have in our home, but live someplace else. So do animals have rights? I've been introduced as like an advocate of the rights of animals, and indeed I am. Some things we do know. We're not going to find the answer to this question in the media, and I know there are people from the media here, and I'm grateful for them for being here. But whatever we're going to find in the media, an answer to a difficult question like this is not going to be found in tomorrow morning's paper or tonight's evening news. And we're not going to find the answer in opinion polls. We'll find what a percent of the people in your country believe in animal rights. That's an interesting thing to know, but it doesn't answer the question, do they believe truly? Is what they believe true? Is what they believe well-founded? We're not going to find the answer to the question, do animals have rights? By just appealing to our unexamined traditions. In America, it was an unexamined tradition that we could own people. They were called slaves. We could trade them, barter them. We could beat them with impunity. It was very difficult to get convicted for killing a slave in the United States during slavery. The reasoning went like this, that if you killed a slave, then you were destroying your property, and no person in the right possession of their mind would destroy their valuable property, so anybody who killed a slave must have been temporarily out of their mind. And so therefore you were not guilty of murder. So it was very difficult to, unexamined traditions. Only by thinking independently, only by taking that muddler step, only by beginning the journey, saying, this is a serious question. This question affects every aspect of my life. From the moment that I wake up till I go to bed. It affects what I eat. It affects what I wear. It affects what I brush my teeth with. It affects every aspect of my life. In some ways, more than any other question you can think of. This question just trickles down into the details of one's life. And so we have to think independently. And that's what the invitation of philosophy is, as I come here as a philosopher. The invitation of philosophy invites us to think for ourselves, to muddle along, if you like, using logic, being factually informed, freeing ourselves from prejudice. And that's the purpose of my remarks, really. Not to try to convince anybody that animals have rights. I don't think anybody's going to have a Saul becomes Paul conversion experience here because of what I say. I don't think that's going to happen. But what I can do is encourage people, invite people to take the journey. When philosophers think about rights, we make a distinction between legal rights and moral rights. Legal rights are rights that we make. I mean, if you have a right to vote here, it's because the people in your country have decreed in the appropriate fashion that you have the right. If the appropriate people hadn't created the right, you wouldn't have it. Same would be the case in my case. And they differ from nation to nation. Not everybody has a right to vote depending on where they live. Not everybody has a right to freedom of religion wherever they live. Not everybody has a freedom of assembly, freedom of speech wherever they live. It depends on where you live and when you live there. So they're not universal, and they certainly are not equal, these legal rights. On the other hand, when we talk about moral rights, as in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights for All Human Beings, what we're saying is we don't make these. There isn't some legislature that can make a moral right or unmake a moral right. And they don't differ from nation to nation. If people have a fundamental right to bodily integrity, then they have their right no matter where they live, when they live, who they are. That doesn't mean that everybody respects it. Doesn't mean that their government respects it. On the contrary, we know all too well that the government doesn't always respect the fundamental rights of its citizens. But that doesn't mean that they lack that right. It just means that they lack having their right respected. Our moral rights as human beings are universal and they are equal. My right to life, my right to bodily integrity, my right to liberty is no higher or lower, no stronger, no weaker, no different than yours, or for that matter, for any other human being. Any serious advocate of human rights, and I include myself among those, and as an advocate of human rights, believes this. Human rights are universal, equal, and not made by us. Now, here's why I think rights are really important. There are two things about rights that make them very, very important in our moral thinking. The first is that our integrity must be respected. Our freedom, our liberty, our bodily integrity, our life must be respected. And it's like rights serve as the protection against the excessive freedom of others. The excessive freedom of others. And it's as if then these rights are like a no trespassing sign. Here's where my body begins, and here's where your freedom ends. Here's where this is my life, not yours for the taking as you please. This is my freedom in my life. And so long as I don't violate anybody else's rights, leave me alone. And in particular, the government, leave me alone. Keep out of my life. That's what we mean that's why our rights are so important. It's the protection against the excessive freedom and intrusion and interference of others, including the government. Not just other individuals, not just your neighbors, not just your enemies, but also the government. And the second thing about the importance of animal rights, is that, or it should be individual rights, I think, is we cannot justify by violating animal rights because we benefit. We cannot say, in this case what we're saying is that rights are trump. And that's from the analogy in bridge. And if you know the game of bridge, as I'm sure some of you do, yes? Still play bridge? If we imagine that we're playing a game of bridge and that the first person plays the queen of spades, second person plays the king of spades, third person plays the ace of spades, and you, the last player, you have no spades. Diamonds are trump. You do have the two of diamonds. In bridge, that two of diamonds beats the queen of spades, the king of spades, the ace of spades. That little diamond is more powerful than any other card in that particular hand because diamonds are trump. So if we think of it in terms of the analogy with the bridge game then, if we think of the queen of spades representing the social custom, the king of spades representing personal benefit, the ace of spades representing the public good, these are all very important values. My benefit, the group's benefit, the public good, custom, tradition, all important, but never to be advanced. The public good, social custom, personal benefit at the expense of violating the rights of the individual. So when we say rights are important, we mean first that they serve as a protection against the excessive interference and freedom of others into our life, including the government. And secondly, we mean that respect for the rights of individuals, the most important card in the game of morality, that respect for the rights of the individual trump other important moral considerations. But do animals have rights? If they do, then they have that protection that a no trespassing sign represents. If they do, then respect for the rights trumps other important goods. But do they have rights? And to answer that question, we have to ask two kinds of questions: factual questions, which ask what is the case, and moral questions that ask about what ought to be the case. The main factual questions are pretty simple, it seems to me. They ask, are any animals like us physically? Are there any other animals that are kind of made the same way we are? And in particular, are there any other animals that have a central nervous system and a brain, that kind of physical structure? If we look around the world, do we find any other animals like us physically? And are there any other like us mentally? Or do any other animals have a psychology? Are they psychologically present to the world? In terms of physically, the answer is obvious, sure. Do any other animals have sense organs? Do they have central nervous system? Do they have a brain? Yeah, mammals do, birds do. They're clear candidates. Do mollusks, do clams? I don't know. I don't think so. But I'm willing to kind of leave that question open. All I want to say, for our purposes, all we have to agree on, is that there are some animals that really do resemble us physically. They have the structure that makes experience possible. They have the structure that makes experience possible. Fish too, perhaps. Are any other animals like us mentally? There are various possibilities. One is the idea that there is nothing going on in the mind of an animal. There is no mind. It's completely empty. Nothing happens. There are no sensations. There are no desires. There are no emotions, no beliefs, nothing going on. Your cat, your dog, nothing going on behind those eyes. Another possibility is that while there's nothing going on, there's more than nothing going on, but what's going on is very little. Just a little bit going on, nominal in terms of sensations or desires or emotions or beliefs, just a tiny bit going on. The other possibility, of course, would be, when you actually stop and think about it as a muddler, you actually ask the question, there's a lot going on in those minds there. I mean, it's not like they're robust in terms of their sensations and their desires and their emotions and their beliefs. Now, what's the most credible position here? That nothing's going on, very little's going on, or there's a robust mental life, psychological life that's going on in the case at least of mammals, at least of birds, perhaps of fish. Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that they have a robust mental life. Look, they don't worry about investments in the stock market. I grant you that. They don't worry about, the promotion at the job. They don't worry about whether they're going to be late to make the plane that's flying to Las Vegas. They don't worry about things like that. They don't have beliefs about things like that. But that they have beliefs and desires about what's important to them, I think that anyone who has lived with an animal understands that. These animals are living beings who are in the world, aware of the world, aware of what happens to them, and what happens to them matters to them, whether you care about it, whether I care about it, whether anybody cares about it. It matters to them. It's of importance to them. It makes a difference to their life, to the quality of their life, and the duration of their life. They are not objects, but subjects. Not a life without a subject, but a subject with a life. So, as they say, the main factual questions are any animals like us? Mentally? Physically? I think so. I think the overwhelming evidence, impartially considered, says, yeah, they are our kin, our biological, psychological kin. By the way, when I say this, I'm only saying what Darwin said. I'm only saying what Darwin said. And he said it more forcefully when he said that the minds of these animals differ from ours in degree and not in kind. Main normative questions: who has rights and why? Philosophers, this is where philosophers, they wade in with their arguments here. The history of philosophy is just littered with debates about rights. And some will say all and only those who are morally responsible have rights. So it is that you and I have rights because when we act, we are reasonably and rightfully held morally accountable for doing what is right or for failing to do so, for doing what is wrong and not having the courage to avoid it. We are held accountable. We are assumed to have control over our choices. We have free will. And so we're held accountable. If all those who are morally responsible have rights, then of course all of us. And if only those, then only those. And so the argument is, there we go. Your dog and your cat, cows and pigs, porpoises and penguins are not morally responsible. No one thinks it reasonable to say cows have duties and that pigs ought to behave in this way rather than that way. They simply aren't made that way. The difficulty is that neither are our grandchildren. They're not morally responsible for what they do. I mean, they accidentally set fire to the house, burned down the apartment, 17 people perish in the flames. I mean, they're not morally responsible for that, although very bad things have happened to people who didn't deserve it. They're not morally responsible. They're not held accountable. Are we to say, therefore, that they are not to be protected, that we are at liberty to injure their body in pursuit of our personal gain or in pursuit of some social custom? No, we don't. We don't say that. We don't say that children have to be morally responsible before they're to be protected by their rights. We don't say that and shouldn't say that. But if we don't say that in the case of children, then it's a double standard to say that in the case of your cat and dog and other animals. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, children don't have to be morally responsible to have rights, but by God, those animals have to be morally responsible to have rights. That's just a double standard. That's not playing fair. You have to be self-aware, another favorite thing. You can see it's going to have the same problem. On this account, you and I have rights because we're aware. We're in the world, we're aware of the world, and we are aware that we are in the world. We're aware, we're self-aware. And the argument then is other animals aren't aware like that. Well, I'm not sure about that, to tell you the truth. I think probably a lot of animals are aware that they're in the world, but that's a separate matter. The plain fact of the matter is that our grandchildren are not aware that they're in the world. And we don't say, therefore, they lack rights. And can use language is the same problem again. Have immortal souls, something that Paul mentioned. That's it. That's the final. That's it right there. Because we've got them and they don't. End of debate. That's it. We have them and they don't. Well, I've always said, first, there are a lot of religions according to which animals do have souls, as you know. So, it's not like, there's just some religions that teach that animals don't have souls. And second, I'm not sure that we have them. Well, I'm not sure that you do anyhow, but no, I've always said, I really hope I have one. It'd be very interesting to kind of go on living after your body dies to some other plane and so on. It would be, it'd be interesting. But I'm not sure that that's true. But here's the main thing that I think is of importance to people to consider, muddlers to consider. And this comes from the C.S. Lewis, who many of you may know, the name C.S. Lewis, a great writer of popular stories and also a great Christian theologian of the 20th century. Lewis makes the following argument. He says, I think animals don't have souls, and I think we do. And therefore we shouldn't eat them, or we shouldn't experiment on them, and we shouldn't wear them. Wait a minute, we say, well, that's not the way this argument's supposed to work. It's supposed to work that we've got rights and they don't. How did that happen? He said, and Lewis says, look, if they don't have souls, then this is the only life they have. Right? Right. Well then, if bad things happen to them in this life, then there's no future life where good things can happen to them, right? Right. Well then, this should be their best life, don't you think? Oh, right, it should be. You're right. I forgot about that, And so, therefore, you shouldn't kill them. You shouldn't experiment on them. You shouldn't wear them. I mean, the very absence of a soul in their case gives them added moral protection rather than added moral protection rather than less moral protection. So the arguments the standard arguments, responsibility, self-aware, language, souls, all that seem to me to fail. But we say, how can we get our grandchildren and others into this family of rights holders, even though they're not morally responsible and they're not self-aware? Well, my answer is, they are subjects of the life. They're in the world, they're aware of the world, what happens to them matters to them, because it does make a difference to the duration and quality of their life, my little grandchildren, and all of us. In this respect, we are equal and the same as those grandchildren, and they are equal and the same as we. But in this respect, as subjects of a life, then the same is true in the case of other animals that we've been talking about. There are objections that are raised against this. Animals lack rights because they don't understand rights, because they don't respect our rights, because they don't respect each other's rights. It's the same problem, again, that not all human beings understand rights, they don't respect rights and the like. It's the same problem. It's the constant effort to have a double standard, one standard for us and another standard for them. It's over and over and over. It's the main theme. It's just simply variations. So here, in my sense of muddling along, and I'm trying, and with my head, and I'm thinking about who has rights and why do they have rights and what are other animals like, and are any of them like us physically and mentally, psychologically, and I get to this conclusion that they are subjects of life just like we are. They are somebody, not something. They have a biography, not simply a biology. They have a life story that is uniquely their own, just as you do and just as I do. When I get to that, then I think about, think of the practical implications if this is true. Rights just trump. Queen of spades, king of spades, ace of spades, social custom, tradition, public good, personal benefit, personal gain, all important values. But respect for the rights of the individual trumps that, limits that, places limits. We can do anything we want to do to advance our personal the good of the public at large, so long as we don't violate somebody's rights in the process of doing it. So if rights are trumped, then we can't justify killing animals because we benefit. We can't justify killing them to eat, for example, because it's convenient, because it's what everyone else does. It's how I was raised. My God, my mother taught me to do this. No, that's not a sufficiently good reason for violating somebody's rights that your mother taught us to live this way. It's what I enjoy. I love the taste of steak or, pork chops or lamb chops or something. That's not a sufficiently good reason for violating somebody's rights, if indeed animals have rights. So the practical implications of this, you can't justify injuring animals or killing animals or injuring their body. You can't justify that for these sorts of reasons. It applies to what we eat, even though it's convenient, habitual, omnipresent. You know the golden arches are the most universally recognized symbol in the world, more recognized by people than the cross of Jesus and the sign of David, the sign of Judaism. The most universally recognized symbol in the world, the golden arches. It applies to what we eat, applies to what we wear, applies to how we learn, and what we do for fun. Whether you go to Disney World or SeaWorld or something and watch animals in captivity. As I said before, it applies to virtually every aspect of our life. So do animals have rights? That's the muddler question to ask. That's the question to explore. Can't find the answers in the media. Can't find the answers in opinion polls or in unexamined traditions. We can't find it in those ways. We can only find it by thinking independently. And that's the invitation of philosophy. Philosophy invites us. Come forward, let's start thinking independently. A very good Dutch tradition, I must say. Invites us to think for ourselves using logic, being factually informed, freeing ourselves from prejudice. And so the purpose of my remarks has not been to try to create some Damascus experience for anybody, but simply to extend that invitation, to think about the issue, using logic, being factually informed, and freeing ourselves from prejudice. Thank you.
I wanted to let these images sink in before bothering you with more words. These are pictures by the photographer Jan van Eyck, and they're part of a project that I want to tell you about. Let me introduce Jan van Eyck to you first. I hope that you'll be interested in taking the opportunity to talk with him later about his project. Jan, could you please stand up so that people will recognize you? He's at the back of the hall. These pictures are 6 images from a huge number of photographs that Jan has taken in the course of the last year and a half. And he is the photographer of the next installment of the project Document Nederland, which is a cooperation in the area of documentary photography between the Rijksmuseum and NRC Handelsblad. The theme of this 8th installment of the project Document Nederland has as its working title Mens en Dier, Man and Animal. And the theme was so appropriate that I wanted to give you a taste of the project and tell you that the exhibition will open on the 13th of November at the Photography Museum Huis Marseille, here on the Keizersgracht in Amsterdam. And on that same day, there will be a special supplement of the newspaper devoted to this theme. And the theme, of course, is so appropriate for Professor Regan's work. You mentioned something, Professor Regan, about the way different cultures treat the same animal differently. This is about how the same culture treats different animals very differently. Some of them we coddle and we polish and we comb their hair and we kiss their toes. And others we have no regard for at all. What do these photos mean to you?
Is this working? Yes, it's working, yeah. I'm sure others saw some of the same things that I saw in them. I saw the theme of closeness and distance, in particular, how some animals are within our life, and then some animals are outside our life, and how those within our life, the dog, even the pig in the one shot with the pig in the dining room, the pigs in the dining room inside the house, that shows that we're capable of relating to animals as somebody special, and somebody special, and not just a traditional companion animal. I mean, that pig was obviously somebody special to be in those circumstances, and that
it's a rather cumbersome pet, isn't it?
Yes, actually, I mean, it would not work well in our household. Let's put it that way. And you can see this personal relationship, and then on the other hand, when you get into some of the other photographs, you see how human beings can create a distance between themselves and other animals, and how animals become anonymous somethings rather than somebodies, and how they become...
Don't some of these pictures strike you as being... Let's share a microphone, because this isn't going to work.
Okay.
They strike me as being both, well, let me say equally sick. We go overboard in coddling, and we go overboard in abusing.
Sure. I thought that as well. That is that there is a... That's why I was trying to be polite about saying about the hog would not fit well within our household. I was trying to say in a polite way that I thought that was going a little too far. And the idea of the pampered pet, that idea, again, I think probably it's not necessary to show respect for another animal to go that far.
Do we pamper out of a sense of guilt?
My guess would be that we pamper out of a sense of need more than we pamper out of a sense of guilt. That is, that there's something that animal gives back to us, and it could be the need we have to feel good about ourselves in terms of our relationship to animals. This is like a substitute for all the other animals, and we'll show, oh, we really do care a lot about animals. But I guess what I think is when people have animals like that they pamper like that, it really is the animal is a representative of the person, and the person needs some sort of recognition from others, and the animal is a substitute for an attempt to get the recognition for the person. So that's what I mean by need. I think it's not necessarily a question of guilt. It's a question of needing some sort of public attention, and they don't know how to get it, but the dog will get it for them, that sort of thing.
And the nice thing about pets, too, is that they give you unrequited love, and they don't ask anything in return except some basic...
Yeah, well, some of them do it, and some of them don't. I mean...
I'm sure the pig does.
I was just thinking about the dogs we had in our life. I mean, I don't think they always gave us unrequited love. They seem to be pretty demanding sometimes, you know. But no, I understand exactly what you mean. When you come home from a long day at work or something, you open the door, the one who's happiest to see you is the dog. Thank God there's somebody there happy to see you, you know. So yeah, they are.
And they don't talk back.
No, and they don't talk back, and they don't criticize your driving either. You know?
I'm not sure I'd want to have this pig in the back seat, though.
No, that seems to me to go far. So, as I say, I don't think we have to go as far as some of the things we saw in the photographs in order to show respect for animals. Remember, what it is to show respect for animals is to make sure that we're not hurting them, and make sure we're not obviously taking their life except for on grounds of mercy for them. I mean, if the best thing that can happen for them because of their sickness is that we end their life mercifully, then that may be something that we should do. But we're not to kill them just because it's convenient or that sort of thing.
In your recent book, Empty Cages, you described philosophy as a disciplined passion, which I thought was a lovely description. Disciplined passion. Mm-hmm. Do you remember?
I do.
Oh.
It was
That made me wonder even more than I already did reading your work. Are you a philosopher or are you an activist?
Oh, I'm a philosopher first, that's for sure. I mean, I wouldn't be an activist if I wasn't a philosopher, I don't think. I mean, I'm a muddler that I only became an animal rights advocate because I was convinced of the animal rights argument. And it really was reason led me to activism. And if I would not have been an animal rights advocate if I hadn't been a human rights advocate. But once I saw the connection between respect for human rights and respect for animal rights, I mean, I couldn't avoid becoming an animal rights advocate. So no, I think reason drove me. But it's also, see, the thing about, at least in my life anyhow, I know people care a lot about a lot of others. I care about my wife and my children and my grandchildren. You know, I really do. I care about what's true. I care about what's reasonable. I care about abstract things like that. And so that's part of what I mean by philosophy being a disciplined passion. It's like you really care about where the best argument is. And it just so happens that I think the best argument is in favor of the rights of animals. And now I've got to go and try to share that truth, which I think is true, with other people. Because if not enough people care about this, then things are terrible for animals. Nothing's going to change for them.
And that's where the activism comes in.
That's where the activism comes in, yeah.
You wrote that the catalyst for getting your thinking started about the position of animals in society and their moral position was the Vietnam War. How did that happen?
Well, that's just how old we are. I mean,
how old are you, by the way?
Really?
Well, you brought it up.
How old am I? 66. Yeah? Okay, 66.
Yeah.
I think that's right. 66. I'm 66. But when we were not caring about animals. We had eyes but did not see when it came to animals until the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War came along, and my wife Nancy and I were opposed to it. We organized the state of North Carolina, our state, to a grassroots organization to end the war. I wrote about it. I lectured about it. I did everything. I marched in Washington about it. And then I thought I would write about it. I was a philosopher. I'd write about it. And the problem was I didn't know where to start. I had never written about war. And I was in a section of the library about war, and I took down a book about war, and it was an autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, by Mohandas K. Gandhi. An autobiography. If you haven't read that, I commend it to you. An autobiography. And Gandhi said basically this to me. He said, "You think the war in Vietnam is wrong because it involves unjustified violence?" I said, "Yeah, I do. That's why it's wrong." Then Gandhi said to me, and when I don't mean that I actually thought he was there talking to me. This is it's as if he were there talking to me. Then he said to me from the page, what are those dead body parts doing in your freezer? Because Gandhi was a famous vegetarian, you know. He was a great pacifist, but also a great vegetarian. And the point he was trying to make, or what you could read from it, is that the destruction of animals for food in America in the middle of the 1960s, roughly, it was not necessary for any important human good, not important for human health, not important for human vitality, not important for human longevity. If anything, it was contrary to those goods, and it involves violence. So it involved violence that couldn't be justified. And I thought, my God, I had never thought that thought in my life. No, I mean, that was just totally new to me. I worked as a butcher. So, I mean, I never thought that, but the more I thought about it, the more I cared about it. It was true.
So it was not so much the immorality of the Vietnam War as the process of the war that, as it were, by a happy happenstance, brought you in contact with the work of Gandhi.
That's right. If I hadn't read Gandhi, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'm sure of that. I just would not have made that turn. I would not have taken that path in my life, I think. He was the right person, depending how you look at it, I think he was the right person at the right time and the right place for me. I read him at the right time. If I read him some other time, it probably would have gone right past me, but it was because of the war and the idea that you could have a whole nation committed to doing something that was wrong, you know, and then the idea that the whole culture could be based on what's wrong. Yeah, it was the right person, the right time for me.
This sounds very much like you were talking about in your lecture about the Da Vincians, who were born with a natural empathy for animals, born with compassion for animals.
Right.
You make it sound like this is not so much a reason, conviction, but an epiphany. A bolt of lightning hits you from the sky, and you think, "Oh, this is the way it should be." And I ask you this specifically because I think there's a danger in that of making animal rights advocates or activists into a sect.
No. I hope I'm not saying that there was. That's the Damascans are the ones who have this transforming experience. I didn't have any transforming experience.
Well, what you describe about your getting acquainted with the work of Gandhi and the moral awareness that broke like the Red Sea.
No, not quite.
Not quite?
No, not quite. No, it wasn't that. But let's put it this way: it was a truth that I wanted to resist rather than to embrace. Because if I accepted it, I had to change how I lived. And I mean, who wants to do that? I mean, I just wanted to go on eating my hamburgers and having turkey at Thanksgiving. I mean, I just wanted to go on. But there, so it wasn't like that. Oh, I agree. That's it. But it was a truth I had to embrace because I cared because it was true. And I had to reconcile my life, adjust my life to that insight. So it wasn't, if I conveyed that, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. It was like a struggle. It was like, I didn't want to give it up. I didn't want to change. But I cared about the truth, and so I just had to. I was reluctant.
Is there anything sectarian to the animal rights movements?
What do you mean? Exactly what do you mean by that? I mean, if you could clarify.
As if, by sectarian I mean having de waarheid in pacht hebben, knowing that this is the only right way.
I think it's true. I understand that that everybody sees the truth through their own lens, so that other people will see it differently. The important thing is that the way I see it, I'm not trying to impose my truth on anybody. I'm trying to persuade people. I am doing that. But that's different than imposing. And I take it that the sectarian way would be to say, this is the one truth and you better believe it or else we're going to do something bad to you. But I'm not doing that. So no, I don't think that, at least as I understand it, that it has that characteristic.
You do differ with a group like the Animal Liberation Movement.
I do.
Because they resort to tactics which are not yours. How do you know? But you do, on the other hand, in your writing say that you are willing to do things that are illegal because you stand for your conviction. How far do you go in your conviction, in your campaign? Where do you draw the line?
Right. My position is Gandhi's position. If you break the law, you face the law. If I break the law, and I have, I don't run away. I stay. I broke the law. Here I am. And if the person wants to say, well, we're going to arrest you and we're going to try you and we're going to convict you, then that's what I have to, that's the battle you have to fight. But where you don't serve the truth or justice by my lights, if you break the law and then vanish into the night. Gandhi would never do that. So my litmus question is always, what would Gandhi do? And Gandhi would, if he broke the law, he would face the law. So that I understand the people who break the law by burning down buildings, for example. I understand that. Burn down a laboratory. I understand why people would be motivated to do that. I would never do that. Or if I did, if we were party to it, I'd stay there. But of course they don't. I think it gives animal rights a bad name. I think that people then think of the movement as a movement of people who are willing to break the law and who are cowardly when it comes to paying the consequences. I don't want to be associated with that.
Has this created a schism within the animal rights movement?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think pretty much the people are divided on those who favor these kinds of tactics and those who don't. What happens, of course, and I say this as a friend of the media, as you know, what happens is that when there's, for the most part, not all the time, but for the most part, as a general pattern, the story that's told is when animal rights advocates engage in unlawful or outlandish activities. The media is interested in that. The media is not interested in a safe landing. The media is interested in a plane crash. Not all the time, but just generally.
I know, the media, it's always the fault of the media.
No, just generally, not all the time. But see, the public perception of animal rights advocates is not a perception of Claudia and Hans and Nancy and I, for example. The media doesn't present normally, not, I should say it's a general rule, that this is the animal rights movement. These ordinary people have doing this. It's people with black masks.
I was just going to say, you don't have fangs.
Yeah, I mean, so we're always working against the stereotype, who we are. All we are, again, are people who take that compassion we all have for some animals and extend it to other animals. That's really what we are. That's the basis of it. And then the question is, what tactics do you use? What means do you use? And the means you use, I think, must always be respectful of the people you disagree with. There's a phenomenon in the United States called open rescue. I favor this. I'd participate in it if I was invited to do. And here's what's involved. People go into a factory farm, for example, and they document abuse of animals. They document it on videotape. And then they'll go to the people who are responsible for this farm, and they'll say, we understand that terrible things are happening to your animals, and we'd like to come and help you straighten them out. And of course what happens is the people say, you've got to be kidding, get out of here, we don't want to have anything to do with you. And then what they do is they go in and they get the animals and they bring them out, the ones that they've documented have been abused. And they say, we've just stolen this property. Arrest us. And of course nobody will. Because if they were to arrest them and have a trial and all the negative publicity about the treatment of animals, they would never do it. So that kind of law breaking, again, breaking the law and facing the law, is something I would accept.
I'm sure you're aware of the very negative publicity that the animal rights movement accrued when Volkert van der Schee murdered Pim Fortuyn.
We are at a distance aware of that, yeah. Mm-hmm. And first, I don't think that, from what I know, is that the person who committed the crime did it in the name of animal rights. I don't know that there was any reason to think that that's why this crime was committed. And secondly, if that were true, if that person had committed that crime in the name of animal rights, I'd be the first to stand up and say, well, he was just mistaken about what animal rights is, and a means that we should be using. You understand, people, I mean, during the time that we've been meeting here, there've been like 5 million animals killed for food in the world, just during the short time we've been here. 5 million. Over 50 billion a year. So if you're an animal rights person, you want to help, you want to stop, you want to, all that, and all this carnage is going on all around you. You can understand why some people kind of lose their patience and want to resort to other kinds of activism rather than my polite activism, you might say. So I understand them, and I've written about that. I don't think it's justified, but I understand it.
I'd like to refer to another schism in the animal rights movement between yourself and, for example, Peter Singer. He says, bigger cages, and you say, and that's the title of your newest book, empty cages.
Yeah. Well, where to begin? There is a significant difference between us.
You're more categorical.
Yeah, I might use other words, but
radical.
What I think is that Singer has a way of thinking about morality that goes like this, very roughly, that in order to know whether you've done is right or wrong, you have to count all the pluses and all the minuses, all the pleasures and all the pains, all the costs and all the benefits, then you add them up, and you see whether roughly speaking, the pluses outweigh the minuses, the pleasures outweigh the pains. And if they do, that's what you ought to do. That'd be the right thing to do. And I just think that's got to be a mistake. And I'll give you just one quick example that illustrates why I think it has to be a mistake. And this is actually a real-world example. A few years ago, there were a group of boys in Boston who took a mentally disadvantaged girl from their neighborhood and took her down into the basement and raped her with a baseball bat and other implements and just abused her terribly. Just terribly. Almost to the point of killing her. Now, all of us realize that's wrong. If somebody says, well, I'm not sure about that, then there's nothing to say to this person. Of course, this is wrong. Now, the question is, what makes it wrong? That's where philosophers come in. They say, well, we have to try to explain, yes, it's wrong, but what makes it wrong? So a view like Singer's goes like this, remember. You have to take all the pluses, all the minuses, all the pleasures, all the pains, weigh them up, and blah, blah, blah. So here you say, well, what about the girl? Pain, pain, minus, minus, minus. What about the girl's parents? Oh, pain, pain, minus, minus, minus. And what about the other girls in the neighborhood where they were insecure now? A lot of minuses. The parents, and so you can see a lot of minuses. So okay, but then Singer's position, the position he represents, says, oh, wait a minute though, don't forget about the boys. What? Don't forget about the boys. You got to put their pluses in there before you can say that what they did was wrong. We have to kind of add all this up. You can't ignore them. Well, I just find that morally obscene. The idea that you have to count the pleasures of the rapist before you can say that what the guys did, what the rape was wrong, just seems morally obscene to me. Of course it was wrong. The fact that the boys enjoyed it makes it worse, doesn't take away from the wrongness. It makes the wrong worse that they enjoyed it. But he has no way of accounting for something like that. So if he has no way of accounting for why raping that girl is wrong, then I don't think he has an adequate way of explaining how we should be treating other animals. That's the philosophical difference we have.
I'm sure you're aware that Europe is in the throes of deciding whether to ratify the European Constitution.
Right.
We're having a referendum here on the 1st of June. And in an article which will appear in the NRC Handelsblad of tomorrow, if it interests you. Yeah, sorry, I'm privileged. There's an article by Rudy Kousbroek, who's a well-known writer and also very dedicated to animal rights. And for him, a reason to vote against the European Constitution is that he is against a constitution that does not make a clear statement against animal abuse at this point in time. He finds that unacceptable. He says that only policy in our European Constitution is devoted towards increasing production. Is this the kind of thing that you can deal with practically or morally in a document like a European Constitution?
I think you can try. I mean, it's pretty clear that animal rights advocates in this country are divided over this. I mean, from the few I've spoken to, I mean, I can hear some people thinking one thing and some people thinking another thing. And it's not that they're uninformed; they are informed, and it's not that they're biased or prejudiced or. I mean, they're not. I mean, they just have honest disagreements, and it is the sort of thing that, in the ideal world, you'd want something strong. In the ideal world, you'd want something strong in the Constitution that came down on the side of animals. But we're not in an ideal world. It might not be the right time to think you're going to get that, and so there might be the other things you think about, or other things you are going to get. And as animal rights advocates should be human rights advocates too.
But what would be the ideal legislative forum to protect animal rights in a more secure fashion?
It's probably going to be vary from case to case. I mean, what would constitute progress in terms of how farmed animals are treated, for example, might be different than what would constitute progress in terms of how animals in laboratories are treated. If we try to have some magic formula that covers everything, some few words that covers everything, it'll be so vague as to probably allow virtually anything. I'll give you an example. In the United States, We require, as a matter of law, that animals be treated humanely. And so do you in this country. As I understand, this is the language of the law. Animals are to be treated humanely. And if you actually look and see what the word humane means, it has a meaning. Look it up. It means to treat with compassion, consideration, kindness, mercy, gentleness. Yeah. So here you have a law, here we have a law that requires humane treatment of animals. And we go out to a pig farm and we see sows in stalls for 4 years, can't turn around, no daylight, no fresh air, that same sow image again, like that for 4 years. 400-pound animals. These are big animals. That's humane treatment. No law is broken. No law is broken. That's merciful. That's compassion. That's consideration. What's the point of the law? What's the point of the law if it allows that in the name of humane treatment?
So what instruments do we have?
Well, for me, I mean, the legislation is always going to be an incomplete answer to the question. For my mission, if I could do that, I'm not a campaigner and I'm not a person. I'm not a head of an organization or something like that. I'm an educator. That's what I think of myself. I mean, that's what I spent my life doing. Before I retired from teaching, I was a teacher. I figured my mission is to educate people so that they make choices, and I'm not a drafter of legislation.
Is it okay if we go to the zoo?
If the cages are empty, I think it would be a good idea, yeah. I mean, somebody told me there's a zoo in Amsterdam, and I said, I mean, are Christians go fight lions in Amsterdam too? I mean, it just seems like an anachronism that we would have zoos in the middle of cities. I mean, like, you could understand what it was that led people to do this before we had the kind of educational opportunities we have now.
Animal Planet.
In terms of videos and all the rest of that. When all we had were like books, and you say, no, we want the children to really see the animal. You can understand, and it wasn't like evil people did this. I mean, people with good intentions did it, but it seems to me to be anachronistic, especially when you've got like elephants that can walk 50 miles a day, 50 miles a day, or if you have dolphins, dive to 400 feet. You can swim up to 40 miles an hour. You go to these places, the sea worlds, where you have marine mammals and they live in these concrete prisons where they really can't be who they are, where animals in zoos can't be who they are. I mean, so what we need to try to do is to figure out what we do. So, for example, in the United States, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take animals out of zoos and putting them in sanctuaries where they can walk 15 miles, maybe not 50 miles a day, but where they can walk 15 or 20 miles a day, where they have matriarchal structures, where they have social structures, where they go from one generation to another generation. Dolphins in the wild, they can have 3 or 4 generations of family in the same pod. And sometimes what happens is the males go away for a year and then they come back. They find them in the ocean. They find their family again. So it's just amazing what's going on. So now we have them in SeaWorld or a Disney World or Busch Gardens or something like that. I don't know what the situation here is. Do you have dolphins, marine mammals in captivity? Oh, well, you know better than we are then. I mean,
Are you disappointed?
No, I am. I thought you would. I know. You are better than we are in many respects.
Well, you've written film scripts and won prizes with them.
That was in my early life. I haven't done it for quite a while, but yeah, film is a wonderful way of trying to reach people.
We were talking about the videos.
Yeah, well, they're film and videos, right? And they're short, and you can pack a lot of information and a lot of inspiration. That was the point of it, to try to educate people, the viewers, and at the same time motivate them Educate and motivate. There's a famous thing where Stephen Douglas was a great leader of the abolitionist movement in slavery in the United States. He was a black, patriarchal man. And he was dying. And a young man, it's a true story, a young man came to pay a visit to him and said, Mr. Douglas, could you tell a young man who's just starting out on this journey that you're near completing, what are the three most important things I can do? And Douglas, so the story goes, lifted his head from his pillow and he said, agitate, agitate, agitate. And and what he meant, I think, was not to burn buildings down and stuff like that, but it was the idea of moral suasion. It was the idea of challenging people to see with their eyes and to hear with their ears the reality of what slavery was, and not to let them escape from facing it. And then if they face it and they can look it in the eye and accept it, then you've done what you can do with that person. You go on to the next person and you agitate and you agitate and you agitate with that person too. And I always thought that if I was dying, not that I'm planning on it anytime soon, but if somebody were to come in, I think I would lift my weary head from my pillow and I would say, educate, educate, educate. But it would be the same idea. If we look the evil in the eye, that's all around us, if we actually look it in the eye and we can live with it, then we've honored the animal. See, my feeling is that to the extent that we don't look at what is happening to them, we dishonor them. We betray them. It's like the final insult to them. It's worse than being cruel to them. As George Bernard Shaw said, worse than being cruel to an animal is being indifferent. Because the indifferent person won't look at it. At least the cruel person's dealing with the real reality of the animal. But our greatest challenge is to make what's invisible visible, and then to act on that.
Your stance is very clear and very specific. No animal research, no factory farming, no hunting, no circuses. Sorry, no zoos. How realistic is this?
I also think you can turn a oil tanker around in bathtub. If you know what I mean. No, I'm not sure how realistic it is.
In Empty Cages, you tackle this issue, of course, and you say, well, it's realistic as long as you believe in the human capacity for good.
That's right. It is funny because when people think about the triumph of animal rights, what it'd be like for us to finally get to the point where, by God, animal rights are being respected and so on. Everybody thinks that would be so wonderful for animals. It would be just so wonderful for animals, but it would be even more wonderful and remarkable for us, it seems to me, because we would have had to grow from where we are now with a selective compassion, selective concern, selective mercy, narrow like that, to big-souled people, big soul, big heart. We would be transformed. It wouldn't just be better for them; it would be so much better for us. It seems to me. So I'm a human liberator, not simply an animal liberator.
You've been working on this for more than 30 years now. In 1985, you established the Animals and Culture Organization. Mm-hmm. Have you seen any progress in all these years of advocacy?
My favorite story goes like this. Nancy and I became vegetarians when there weren't any other vegetarians. We really did. We didn't know anybody who was a vegetarian. Not another couple, not another person. And I always say that in our social life, we were like ants at the picnic. Everybody knew we were coming, but nobody was happy to see us,
Oh, what are we going to do with Tom and Nancy?
Oh, here come those ants again, and
social porcupines.
But here's what happened, more than 25 years ago. We went to the first ever international conference on animal rights that we ever attended. It was in Cambridge University in England. And we went there. And we were freshly minted vegetarians ourselves, and we went there. And all the big names in animal rights were there. It was really a big deal for us. And the first evening's dinner was beef Wellington.
Oops.
And the second evening was venison. And on the menu, and then the third one was rack of lamb, and then the fourth evening, the gala banquet was veal cordon bleu. And we thought we had gone to the wrong place. We thought, now wait a minute, we're here to discuss animal rights. So we went up to the organizers and we said, there were some other vegetarians there, and we went up and we said, I don't know, is it possible to make an accommodation here? If we're going to talk about the rights of animals during our meeting, we'd prefer not to be eating them at mealtime. And the organizers, not all of them, but some of them, looked at us like we were just horrible people. That we would be so rude. And I say, if they had an iron that you put
a branding
iron. If they had had a branding iron with the letter V, they would have put it in our forehead, so that everybody would know we were vegetarians the rest of our life. But so it was. What was interesting is they finally did make an accommodation for us, and then 8 years later they had another conference, and no meat was served. But then we had become vegans, and we gave them a hard time.
Another V.
And we gave them a hard time again.
V square.
Right. So when any especially young people ask, has the movement changed at all in the years you've been involved? I say, you want an idea how much things have changed? Here's what it was like to go to a conference almost 30 years ago, and then another one almost 25 years ago, with people who said they believed in animal rights. So yes, things have really changed.
So mankind has perhaps become just one jot less hypocritical?
I think so. I think we're making progress. Look, how many people have come? All these people, all of you have such a busy life. And to make time in your life to come and think about this. I know the Dutch love to think, and I know the Dutch love to discuss and debate. I mean, it's the greatest national characteristic of the country, it seems to me.
Well, I'm not sure that's a compliment.
Well, I mean it as a compliment.
Let me put my last question to you so that the audience can have a go at you as well.
Sure.
It's in the same vein, but I thought this was a great aphorism that you quoted in one of your books. You said, all great movements go in 3 stages: ridicule, discussion, adoption.
Right.
Where are we now?
We're in a discussion, which is appropriate here in Amsterdam. No, it's quite clear. 35, 40 years ago, animal rights people were dismissed as little old ladies in tennis shoes. And it is the case that it remains the case today that most of the movement is women. There's roughly 70% of active animal rights advocates in the United States are women. So there's a feminization of the movement that remains true and always has been true. But it wasn't young women. It was old women, old ladies who cared about their cats and pampered their dogs and so on, who were identified as the animal rights movement. I don't think that was accurate back then, to tell you the truth, not at all. But now it's not our identity at all. Now, 30 years ago, there was not a single university in the United States of America where there's a single class where students read and discussed animal rights. We have over 4,000 colleges and universities, and I venture to say that today there's not a single university where there is not discussion of the topic. As anyone who's involved in philosophy in particular knows, the landscape has been radically altered. Animal rights is as legitimate a topic of discussion in the classroom as abortion, euthanasia, infanticide, stem cell research, all these other divisive issues of our day and time. The long-term consequences of putting it on the agenda, putting the topic on the agenda, are yet to be calculated. But yeah, so I remain optimistic. We're in the stage of discussion. And it's just a question of creating a critical mass and getting rid of a critical mess that stands in the way of our transforming this world.
Thank you.
Thank you.